Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time the topic is benefits. Really, when we're talking about benefits, this is that indirect compensation that we get. So they're not direct payments or reimbursements to it. Reimbursements. These include things like health insurance, retirement pensions of all types, possibly some paid time away from work. Child and elder care, though, these are services that are provided, or discounts, or flexible scheduling, that sort of thing. Um, Education assistance is a good example of an indirect compensation of a benefit. And these things are generally, as it says here, part of the total compensation package. In fact, I think most organizations look at the indirect compensation, the benefits, as about one third of what a person normally makes on the job. So, from the organizational point of view, it is part of compensation. It's just the non monetary part of it. Well, certainly, there is a connection to the monetary side, though, right? Um, what we have, though, are required benefits and also discretionary benefits. And it's just like the words mean. If it's required, then an employer has to provide it and go through all the work and the energy it takes to do that and the upkeep. Discretionary benefits are different. They're not required or mandated by law in any way, and so they don't have to be paid. It just depends on the organization. Now certainly, employers are going to want to go beyond just what the law says if they want to attract the best and most qualified applicants for their companies, and also to get people to stick around. So required benefits are things that employers, regardless of sector, have to do, that they have to contribute to certain funds and so forth. If they're discretionary, they don't. So public employers might actually be mandated to offer some additional benefits. As you know, there can be some differences in HR laws and regulations as they're applied to public employees, or sometimes there are differences when they're applied to nonprofits and so forth. But generally, all of this stuff, more or less, except for the caveats, applies to also the private sector. So required benefits are really those sorts of things that we have to do. Um, some examples for you. Social Security, it's required by law. And what happens with that? Well, it's a payroll deduction. The employer contributes half of the cost, and the employee contributes half of the cost in the case of Social Security. It's actually 15% of gross wages, and each party pays half of that. And so that's what that deduction is on the payroll. Um, Another required benefit is Medicare. If a person is legally enrolled in a Medicare program, which is basically a form of government health care, then the costs to maintain that have to be paid by the workforce, and everyone contributes to that if it's a required benefit. Um, Unemployment compensation, what we think of as unemployment insurance. Workers' comp or workers' compensation. And there is a process for each of those two things to be approved for it, to qualify, so forth. And then also a required benefit is to provide um, military leave and so forth, that you can't lose your job. That is a benefit. Doesn't necessarily pay you, but it guarantees that when you come back after a deployment or something like that, if you're in the National Guard, that your job is there when you return. Now, public employers might have to do some of these additional benefits, like I mentioned, and that might include a special type of retirement plan that only exists in a certain agency or public part of the public sector, and it might also regard matters of disability. So there's going to be some minor differences here and there. Now, when it comes to Social Security, in particular, this is a required benefit. And as I've said, the employer and the employee both are paying 7.5% of that 15 in order to make the total amount that gets paid into your account over time. And this was certainly established way back, just like the FLSA in 1938 gave us the first labor laws and rules and so forth. We got the Social Security Act of 1935, a few years earlier, and it really, at that time, it said that Social Security is not required for public employees and nonprofit employees if they wanted to opt out. So there have been certainly significant changes over time with the Social Security program. Today, it covers everybody. Um, the Social Security amendments of 1983 in particular made it mandatory for all employees. So it's universal, regardless of sector these days, but it didn't start out that way. The four kinds of benefits that we're talking about here that Social Security provides, and this is basic stuff that any HR manager should know and be able to reel off the top of their head. You get an old age or a disability benefit. So you hit a certain age, you can qualify. If you wait a little longer, you qualify for a little bit more of a payment and so forth, but it's an old age or disability benefit. Um, there are also benefits for dependents of retired or disabled workers. The third one, benefits for the survivor of a worker who dies. So that would be like a spouse. Um, and then there's a lump sum death benefit that Social Security will pay. So those are the four kinds. And they have been around now since about almost 90 years. That is a long time. Um, and although it was meant to be mainly a safety net at the time, because that was the time of the Great Depression, it was never meant to really support people completely in their retirement and to be a totally retirement income, but it has become that, and it has always been that over time. The thing with Social Security was, at the time it was created, the 30s were quite different. People did not live as long. And from the government's point of view at that time, and the legislators who put it together, they realized that the great majority of people would never, ever collect the benefits. They would all die first. Well, that has certainly changed today. And in our society, Social Security is something that we are still dealing with that has continuous problems with solvency and so forth. And we will probably continue to grapple with it over time to figure out how to continue to make it work. Um, Now, this last thing here about Social Security is the Self-Employment Contributions Act. Um, this is for people that start their own businesses. Generally, if you've ever been an entrepreneur or your parents have, you know that you can operate under a Schedule C for your taxes, which just means that you're a sole proprietor. You are the whole business, or you have one or two employees, something like that. But it's basically to cover self-employed persons, and it sets up mechanisms so you can't escape paying the Social Security tax. And in fact, because you are not only the employer but the employee as well, when you own a self running business and you are the whole thing, you pay 15% of your income into a fund for the Social Security. So that is something that entrepreneurs certainly have to keep in mind, and it's something that you have to do legally. Um, and you'll find it out when you pay tax. Um, Now, there's also a provision in this Self-Employment Contributions Act that applies to religious workers. And it really just says something very simple. If you make $100 or more per year and you are a religious organization, you can opt out. So if you are doing a self-employment directly related to religious activity, and so I don't know a lot of detail about that, but the way I understand it is that um, it have to meet the conditions and so forth that you really are acting in a religious organization type of manner. So there'll be some standards there that you'll have to meet for that. Now, Medicare, I've said, is another required benefit. It is also a federal program, so it's national. And what it does is it's simple. It just pays for certain health expenses for persons who are 65 years of age or older. Now, certainly that could be changed, that threshold of 65 years to 55 years old, or whatever the government or society itself is telling the government that we think is appropriate here. So it's not set in stone necessarily at that age. It can be changed and revised with laws. Um, but for now, it is a required benefit, and it really does provide a very necessary mechanism for a lot of people who don't have a retirement pension, or the companies that they worked for 30 years and got a pension went bankrupt, and the first thing that got thrown out was all the pensions. And so they're living on Social Security. And they might also be on food stamps or something, depending on that level of payment that they get and they try to live on. Um, and so Medicare does pay for a lot of health expenses for people of a certain age. And we're probably lucky that we do have this program. Otherwise, we would have so many more people in America that who, if they already aren't on Medicare and Social Security at the poverty level, they certainly would be. Um, also, this is funded from payroll taxes. This is the thing on a person's paycheck that's represented as FICA. And you'll see that acronym there on your paycheck. It's a very small little tiny percent of something, and it is taken off the gross, and everyone pays a Medicare cost. So it's shared by all taxpayers, and this has been uh, on quite a long time. The rate of the Medicare tax rate is 2.9%. At least it was a couple of years ago, and I could be wrong on that. It might be a little lower now because interest rates are the lowest probably of all time right now in the country. Unemployment compensation. Getting your unemployment check when you get laid off or lose your job for no fault of your own and you qualify, um, getting this unemployment insurance is a lifeline. It doesn't last forever. There are regulations for approval, how much you get. Your employer pays money into this. You pay money into it. It's deducted from payroll. So it's one of those things that's mandated. Employers have to pay the cost, and so do the employees. But it does pay back a portion of wages to employees who have lost their jobs or laid off. And you're supposed to be able to, in the ideal world, find a job within the time period that you have to collect these funds. And of course, we all know that that doesn't always happen. Um, it really operates under federal-state partnerships. The federal government uh, really doesn't administer, but passes the laws and the regulations, provides a real minimal sort of oversight. But state laws and how they are handled in the specific regulations for applying and approval are handled state to state. So they will vary. In some states, actually, if you move from one state to another and you happen to be on unemployment insurance at the time in the state you're leaving, it depends on the state, but some states that you move to, with a process, might allow you to reinstate that unemployment claim and collect it through the state that you're now in. But they would make an arrangement with the other state. They would not pay that money. The other state would still be responsible, but they would facilitate it for you. And then there, of course, are states who won't help you at all, and you would be hard pressed to do it long distance, probably, to meet all the requirements that you need, to make sure that you have continued eligibility and so forth. So states have that responsibility to determine how to operate these unemployment programs and to administer the benefits as well. Um, Nonprofits can choose to not participate and to not reimburse the state directly, only for the claims of their past employees. Um, and so that is different. That one sector, public sector, private sector, they cannot choose not to participate and reimburse. Um, so you are at a bit of a disadvantage as a nonprofit employee if you get laid off or lose your job. You don't have as much legal recourse as in the other two sectors. Now, another required benefit, workers' compensation, certainly very important, as well as military leave. Now, workers' comp is what we normally call it. That's the popular euphemism. It's an employer financed insurance program. So this may be the real root of why I think most of us have the impression that it's hard to get a workers' compensation claim approved and be eligible and so forth. It's because states make it difficult. They are paying all of the cost themselves and they're not sharing deductions with you out of your paycheck and so forth. So in that sense, it's providing compensation to employees who are unable to work because of some job related injury or illness. And it's quite expensive for them. And if it's a company that's in a hazardous industry, or they just happen to have a poor record of safety or something, and they get a lot of approved workers' compensation claims, it is a really incredible financial burden that doesn't go away. Um, Most states do have their own laws in this area and administer the programs, and they do vary considerably. And now, one thing, uh, independent contractors, those people who are self-employed or whatever profession they claim to be in, they do not have to be covered by workers' compensation. Indeed, since you are not making a deduction to the government, nobody is paying in any money anywhere. You are the employer. There is no way you can award yourself workers' compensation as an employer when you have no fund for it and so forth. You can see the legal quagmire here. Um, Now, when it comes to the other part of the discussion here, military leave, this is also required, and this is important because so many of us, are either in the military service or tied to it, or our families are in so many ways. And we just need to have equity here, which is fairness. Reserve and National Guard units can be called up to active duty for all sorts of reasons, natural disasters, political intrigue and tension. Um, and these units, these individuals have rights with respect to retirement and health benefits provided by their employers. So they don't lose them when they get deployed, and their jobs are there when they get back. So providing the military leave, approving it, and the job being there when you get back, and continuing health and coverage and all other required benefits, the employers still have to do that. And so this is a protected sort of thing. And I think we all think that this is very appropriate. Now, really what I'm talking about here with benefits is indirect compensation, as opposed to the things we've talked about in the past with direct compensation, which really are direct payments to you of money, well, reimbursements. This is not the same with benefits. So uh, this is a pretty good graphic that really does give us what we see in most textbooks as the main types of indirect compensation. So over time, it's not the money you're being paid, it's the policy. How much will pay you and under what circumstances? Hospitalization. What sort of policy do we have for a furlough, for sick leave, with pay, without pay, and so forth? What benefit are we offering? Um, Insurance. Insurance is not mandated in the sense we don't have to provide you life insurance as an organization. No law says we have to do that. But if we offer it, it's not a payment to you, and you don't get a payment when you're dead, right? So insurance is a benefit that is offered contingent upon something happening, something later. Leave travel is a policy again. So any of these things up here that you can see are policies are indirect things. They're things that we will do depending on circumstances, depending on approval and eligibility. And that's how it'll always be put. So paying you to travel depends on the company policy. Retirement benefits. Companies are not required to offer you a pension of any particular type. They do it because they want workers to stick around, because they care about the workers, because they want the best people to come and seek employment at their companies. The same thing with providing extra things that we would consider generally a euphemism of perks, holiday homes. Well, generally, most average employees don't get those sorts of things. Top executives might negotiate those sorts of things into their contracts. But again, they're policies, they're maybes, what ifs, they're contingent things. And things like flexible timings, when you get vesting for your pension, if they happen to offer one, uh, other things that they might do, and what is their leave policy in general. Different professions and different industries do it different ways. For instance, in the education field and higher education, if you're a tenured professor, depending on the school, the university, the college, you're allowed to take a sabbatical. And there are different rules for it. It could be a whole year off, 2 semesters to go do some research project. There are generally rules that or conditions, things they want you to accomplish during that time period. And during the time period, you would get paid less or nothing at all, depending on what your faculty contract says with that college or that university. So it's going to vary. That's an example of an indirect benefit in the higher education industry as it regards leave policy. Now, pensions are discretionary. So here's where we start talking about things that are not required. If they're not required, employers are not mandated to do it. They don't have to make deductions. They don't have to put it together programs. They do not have to do it. And so things like, pension. Let's just talk about the pension in general. Pensions um, are, are monetary payments that provide retired or permanently disabled employees with income, and it's generally for the remainder of their lives. They're not mandated, they're discretionary. There might be a wrinkle with that, though. In the public sector, different classes of employees are often covered by different sorts of pension plans. Depending on the sector of the public sector that they're in, there are many different elements and so forth, levels of government and so forth. So you can find some differences there. We also have what we call defined benefit plans. Again, a plan is a policy, it's a what if, it's a contingency thing, depending on approval and eligibility. And so it qualifies as indirect, as a benefit. Um, and this would be a pension plan that specifies the benefits or the methods or the procedures of determining what benefits anybody gets at the exact time of retirement. And so it might be a time limit requirement in there. If you serve so many years, you get this. If you serve this many years, you get more. If you do this or that, it changes this, and so forth. So um, it really means it's not a particular level or rate of contribution that anyone is making. The employer is not really making it, and they're not mandated to do it. They make up some rules, and then they apply them when the circumstances arise for any given employee. It's very similar to the defined contribution plan. Now, this is a little different, where the employer guarantees that specified contributions, which is sometimes like you will agree to put 3% of your annual salary into the pension plan that the organization has created for its employees, even though they're not required to by law. So the terms of it are defined for you, and you contribute to it. And in fact, faculty here at Westminster College, for instance, we don't have a retirement plan in the real sense of a pension, but we do have a defined contribution plan where you can choose, and I think it might be 3%, where we can put in 3% of our paycheck every time if we want, or an amount we decide. We've defined it, and that would be deducted out, and it would be put into an employee's account that we can't touch because it would be treated just like a pension or retirement plan until you retire and so forth. So generally, companies that do these sorts of things take that money, and of course, it's all in the agreement that you agree to when you say that you're going to contribute something like this to a plan. They invest that money. And so it is possible that you could increase the amount of money that you put into it, or you could actually lose it, depending, because investments are often done in the stock market and mutual funds and things like that. So examples of a defined contribution plan are things that you're already familiar with. 401ks. We also have a 403b, which is slightly different, but basically 401k is what we would say is every HR professional ought to know that a defined contribution plan is a 401k. The employee says how much they want to put into it. It's not like a mandated thing. It's not, it's optional. It's a discretionary thing. So that tells you right there, a 401k is not a mandatory benefit. It's not required. It's discretionary. Now, vesting. Vesting is a process. It's a policy. It says that you get something after something. You've vested, you've shown something, and generally we're talking about time. How long have you been somewhere? You don't get any retirement in many companies, for instance, many organizations, if you don't stay 5 years, or you don't get anything you've put into a defined plan or and so forth until 2 years, and then it kicks in with regularity. Or there'll be rules. You won't start gaining interest, or they won't invest your money until you've reached the vesting threshold. So it is very much this idea of vesting. It's discretionary. So the vesting occurs when contributions made to a retirement plan by the employee um, really are considered official. That would be the best way to put it. That's when the benefits start to belong to the employee. Before that time, they're policy. And so, in this sense, for most defined benefit pension plans, if you leave the organization, you retain those non-forfeitable rights to the benefits when you retire, but you have to hit that vesting threshold. Um, and so, some people, if they know that they're going to leave the company, organization, you would wait till that date appears until you get past the vesting date to make sure you get everything that you've spent some time and effort and money to build up. Otherwise, you'll get what you put in, but you won't get anything else. Um, and that's not really the idea that you're trying to accomplish. Um, Most defined contribution pension plans do allow you to take the accrued amount when you depart in a lump sum payment. This is generally taxable, and it's not going to be that cut and dried. There'll be some rules. There may have you a waiting period. They might say you have to wait 30 or 60 or 90 days even. Since these are not mandatory programs, they create the rules. And when you agree to participate in these sorts of things, you're agreeing to the rules. So every company could be different, and certainly the HR manager should be well versed in what programs and sorts of non-required benefits their organization is offering, particularly something like vesting. Um, let's take a look at health insurance here, because this is something that many people think is mandated, but it's not. This is actually a discretionary benefit. Um, Companies simply do not have to get you health insurance. It's as simple as that. It's not required by any law. And this is why it's so hard for many small companies, certainly, to provide a required benefit like health insurance. It just might the cost, particularly in our country, might be so much that they simply couldn't afford to be in business at all if companies had to provide this. And I think that is the biggest logical reason why it's not mandated. Um, the way our economy is set up, we simply can't afford to do it unless we get big enough and we have enough employees. So it is discretionary. Um, it is the most frequently provided uh, benefit out there that's not mandated. And we refer to them as we have our HMOs, our PPOs, and a variety of acronyms that describe the types of plans and so forth that we have under health insurance. Um, we do have some laws that affect health insurance coverage and how we handle it in organizations. The HR manager is the one responsible for making sure those are followed to the letter. We have the COBRA Act. That's the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. And really, it's just a simple thing that says if you leave an employer, you have temporary continuation of coverage. Um, some employers will allow you to stay on their coverage for time periods, not usually forever, um, 60 days, 30 days, 6 months. It just depends on the organization because they're writing the rules again. But it does give employees who have left an organization some discretion. Even a terminated employee is covered under COBRA. So they're going to get that minimum use of the healthcare plan and so forth. So in that sense, most people really do appreciate the COBRA regulations. We also have HIPAA. You're probably familiar with the acronym. It stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This was in the mid-90s, and it allowed employees to switch your plan, regardless of any pre-existing conditions that you might have had. And now generally there are rules about switching plans. There's a sign-up period in most health coverage, and employers are determining these things because they're not required in certain things by law. So they can set when you can switch the plan, but they can't say that you can't switch a plan. Uh, but it does protect employees that have conditions, who have pre-existing conditions, which is one of the biggest controversial issues in the country today. And this, the HIPAA Act from the 90s prohibits group plans from dropping sick employees because they don't want to do the cost anymore. Or they've got some older employees that have had a few catastrophic instances, cost the plan a lot of money. They're in a group plan. It affects everybody's rates. And they have a mainly large group of younger employees who aren't filing as many claims. We can't have that sort of inequity. Everybody is going to get older, and so we have to share the cost amongst all of us. That is the only way that we're going to be able to all be able to afford at some point when legislatures come to their senses and really craft a plan that will work for our country. We're going to have to share the costs so everybody can afford to have health care. We also have the Mental Health Parity Act. Now, this is much more recent, in 2008. This is saying that if a company provides some insurance, you must provide the same coverage for mental illness as you would for a physical disorder. Now, there are some caveats in there. We're talking about amounts of money spent, not denying certain categories of illnesses, and things like that. So those are details that really is not important for us to remember right now, just to know that they do exist, that mental illness is covered and mandated under certain regulations and so forth. So while we're not mandated to do health insurance, if we do it, we have to make sure that we handle the mental side as well as the physical side. So there are complications and challenges. So we have to understand how the laws work and so forth if we want to get it right. And then there are all sorts of things that fall generally under health insurance that are discretionary. Your dental insurance, discretionary. Optical, same thing. Prescription drug coverage. These are all optionary. But certainly, you don't go and try and find a job if you can avoid it at an organization that won't provide you with these things that most of us consider the basic necessities of life. So organizations realize this as well. And do we all want laws that tell us everything in life to do and not do? There ought to be, in our society of freedom, some give and take where companies do things because they know it's the right thing to do. And companies and organizations are capable of this. We see it when companies do things to protect the environment, to go green, to do things with their communities and things like that. And I think this notion of discretionary benefits, and in particular health insurance, falls into that category. Now, disability benefits also not mandated by law, they're discretionary. Now, disability insurance provides those monthly benefits to employees who can't work for an extended period of time due to injury or illness. It's not considered to be permanent. It's considered to be maybe a lengthy period, it could be, but it's accepted and it's approved. And this is important because this is really what we're calling more short-term disability insurance, as well as some long-term, but we're not necessarily saying it's permanent. Permanent disability insurance, we would have to say, well, no, that's workers' compensation. So you could see the difference there. They're a similar intent, but they're really accomplishing different things. Now, most of these types of plans, disability benefits, they do distinguish between a disability attributed to an accident on the job, which does give you higher benefits and likely lifetime benefits, but certainly fewer requirements with respect to years of service on the job and so forth. Again, A disability that is not job related could be treated completely different, not approved. Might be based on the notion that you had that when you came here. The job didn't make it any worse. You just got older and it was a natural progression. And so you can see that this notion of paying disability, determining whether it's approved or not approved, whether it's a short or long term, it can get complicated. And quite often it gets quite legal. We also have paid time away and educational sorts of uh, benefits. Uh, these are discretionary things. Whether someone is going to get paid away from work. For instance, when you're not at work for being sick, that's paid time away from work if it's sick leave. Now, the actual payment, that's a direct payment. But the policy, again, the intent, the contingency plan that is sitting there waiting for the circumstance to happen to the employee or the individual, that sick day is on the books. And so, in that sense, it's discretionary. Companies are not required by law anywhere to offer you sick days or to pay you when you're not at work because you were sick. Again, this is something companies do because if you don't do it, you won't always attract the best people and they won't stay as long. It's very simple. That's why companies do a lot of things that they're not forced to do. Um, Sick leave is like that. Vacation days are the same things. Holiday pay, well, if you're covered under FLSA laws, the labor law from 1938 that set overtime and so forth for non-exempt employees, you've got to pay them holiday pay. And that would be a required benefit. But otherwise, having a policy on the books about this is the rate we pay, because the law doesn't say exactly how much to pay, organizations will do that. They're just required to do that. Um, and personal days off. Some companies will actually offer you paid days off, maybe for mental health, because they know some employees take days off when they're not sick and really rationalize it saying, I needed a mental health day, I was just stressed. And these are realities of modern life and so forth. Whether your organization is going to think in those terms, to be as supportive of employees in those terms, to be flexible and so forth, really just depends on the organization's culture. And some will and some won't. Uh, I think people really do want companies and organizations to work with them better and to really form a partnership that would last a long time. Now, we also have other policies, programs relating to educational. Generally, these revolve around tuition reimbursement, and it might even allow you to have a flexible schedule to leave work early or make up time um, to attend classes. And they might provide you information that you need for tax credits, things like that. And so those are quite popular. Quite often, dependents of employees at organizations are offered these plans. You go through the approval process. Most of the time, they won't pay 100% of all costs, but they may pay a portion, and it is certainly helpful. Helpful. And at the same time, there are caveats along the way. Some may require a certain grade level, grade at the end of the study, and some may not. It just depends on the company. Again, when we have discretionary sorts of things, the companies are making the rules and so forth. And of course, organizations are smart. They're going to try and use best practices. They come up with ways that work, that are appropriate. And certainly we have to talk about quality of work and quality of life issues because they do impact whether or not companies do have this attitude that indirect compensation, discretionary benefits probably are a smart way to go. So we have things that we call sort of flexible benefits. In other words, we have a policy, a general policy of adaptability and being flexible with our employees and look at that, their situations as they arise as individual cases that maybe we should respond in different ways that's appropriate to help them. Um, and so we might offer programs of different types, have policies on the books, provide child or elder care assistance. Or if we don't give any money, which would be direct, if it's a benefit, it would be a policy or a program we put together. and we've taken care of the cost as the employer. So childcare on site, that would be one, or having a program you could enroll in that would do some elder care for you, your family needs, and so forth. Um, they could opt in for benefits such as dental benefits would be a flexible benefit. So would optical. And some organizations today will go so far as to offer domestic partnership benefits. That is a form of flexible benefits. That's for gay couples of all types and so forth. And then we have these other things here, the EAPs, Employee Assistance Programs, very similar to what I've been talking about here. They provide maybe some counseling services for employees and their families. And they're addressing issues that come up in real work-life situations, quality of life situations, situations that our health and wellness are at stake. So we're talking about alcohol and drug testing programs, outplacement assistance and for training and all sorts of professional development. And in general, having a flexible job environment where possibly employees are allowed to trade holidays and shifts if they meet the proper skill requirements of the jobs and things like that. Generally, just as an aside, these are companies that probably are flatter organizations. They're more organic. They're more about participative management, collaborating and engaging with employees and so forth. But you could also see these sorts of things happen in bureaucracies and tall organizations as well. But they would be much more structured and rigid and a little more time consuming and challenging to navigate through, you might say. To wrap this up, I would say that benefits are really important because even though they're not mandated by law and required, um, all organizations, like I've said many times, and not just that I want to repeat myself all the time, it's because it's an important concept for human resource managers always to remember. We want the best people. We want to be the best company. We want to rule our sector. We want to rule our market. We want to be the top competitor. We want to have a distinctive competency. And none of that happens unless you get the best people, and you don't get the best people unless you attract the best quality applicants. So offering benefits, being that type of company that people want to work for, that they flock to, that you have to take time and effort to sort through the all the submissions when you are looking for work. That's a good situation to be in. Benefits improve morale. They are inspiring. Indeed, they do make people loyal. Retention goes up. Turnover goes down. Rewards work in America. Certainly they do. Um, and so organizations, just like regular workers, individuals of all type who work in organizations, both sides of this equation have to really pay attention to work-life balance and these quality of life issues, and we can do it through managing our direct compensation. We can do it through particularly adding in the other things that are important to people, the discretionary benefits, and really making things work for people. Okay, folks, that's what I wanted to cover this time. I'll talk to you again soon.